So, key lesson from history, the importance of regulation, and the proposed Penokee mine. I hope it's dark enough for you all to see. And I'm not going to use the laser pointer, but... nah, it'll get too dark. That's fine. Okay, so in the area where I hope you can see the red there. Here, I'll try. Laser pointer. Oops, not the laser pointer. There we go. Okay, there's the proposed mine site. A closer-up picture shows the blue would be where the proposed Penokee mine would be. It's actually quite a significant area. It's a very large area that would be affected by this proposed mine. And there is a history of mining in this region. This is not a completely untouched region by any stretch of the imagination. So some of the history of the mine were that in 1848 was the first record we have of mining engineers, government engineers in this case, looking around and noting that there were some really significant iron ore deposits in the rocks here. Mrs. Randall was the engineer. Real development didn't happen though until 1886, about the same time as the logging boom, and it continued until 1965. So that was a long time for mining in the area. You know, any given town always didn't have good jobs and moved from place to place within the area, but a total of about 71 million tons of iron were extracted from the region. But the key point here is that these were deep shaft mines. This was not open pit mining, this was not mountaintop removal mining. This was mining that went deep into the ground, and it extracted the really high quality concentrated ore quite deep in the ground. So the environmental effects were there, but they were much, much less than an open pit mine. The human effects, the health of the miners themselves, it was probably much higher risk. It employed a lot of miners, but there were certainly risks to the work. This mining industry really collapsed in the region with pretty strong effects for the economic health of the communities in the 1960s. When in Minnesota, on the Iron Range there, they discovered cheaper ways to do open pit mining, surface mining in Minnesota. And so it's not that all the ore went away. The cheap, easily accessible ore was pretty much mined out by that point. So the ore body that we've known has been there is indeed one of the largest remaining iron ore bodies in the United States. This is a really significant ore body. 10 to 20% of known reserves in the country, so that's a lot. Potentially could mine 1.1 to 2 billion tons of iron ore, that's a lot. But this is not an easy ore body to get into. It's tilted, which means that it's actually pretty hard to access compared to, say, the surface mines in Minnesota. Because it's tilted, much of the best ore is buried at least 300 feet deep, goes down to 900 feet deep. It's only 20% iron, it's a taconite body, and so that means that there's a lot of waste products that have to be processed and then dealt with, typically dumped, often in wetland areas. And so that makes it expensive to mine, a big, big proposition to try and mine. The proposed mine that Gogebic Taconite is talking about developing right now, it would be 21 miles long, which would make it one of the largest mines in the world, but it wouldn't all be mined at the same time. So some reclamation would have to happen in part of the area before the other areas got developed. But that's still a really big mine. It would be up to about a quarter mile wide. It would have to remove 600 to 900 feet of what they call overburden, what we call ecosystems. First, of course, we'd have to remove the forest, which is one of the most extraordinary intact hardwood forests in the north. And as a forester, I'm interested in that part of it. And so then they would have to do something with that 600 to 900 feet of overburden. The mine would be about 1,200 feet wide, about a little less than a quarter mile wide. So the very first stage that they've been talking about would be a 4-mile long pit. So it would be very significant, but not the whole 21 miles. Gogebic Taconite doesn't own this land. It's owned, a tiny bit is county forest. Most of it, though, is in private hands. A company in Illinois, a company, I forget where the other company is, but the mining rights, the leases have been purchased by Gogebic Taconite. So the tailings piles are one of the most significant questions. What would happen with those tailing piles? Because much of the mine would affect the headwaters of the Bad River watershed, this has become an enormous concern for lots and lots of people. So how might this affect the watershed and then the lakes in the region? Okay, so 71 miles of rivers and streams flow through the proposed mining area. And again, these numbers sort of fly by, but that's a lot. And in particular, it's at the headwaters of the Bad River watershed, which is one of the most significant watersheds, sub-watersheds on Lake Superior. And there are all sorts of very intricate surface and groundwater connections in the mining site and Lake Superior as a whole, and particularly in the Bad River Kakagan sloughs. So the proposed mining site is not on the Bad River Reservation, but it's just upstream of the reservation, and then the water would flow through the Bad River Band's tribal lands. The reservation is on ceded territories. I'm sorry, the mining site is on ceded territories, but not on the current boundaries of the reservation. So one of the main concerns, obviously, about what this proposed mine, given where it's sited, would be is not just what would happen right where the ore is being dug up, although those are enormous impacts, especially on forests, but what would happen downstream? What would happen both to the wetlands right along the proposed area, but even more significantly, what would happen to the wetlands downstream from the proposed mine? This is an image from the Nature Conservancy of the Kakagan Bad River sloughs. And of course, this is probably the most significant and most troubling potential impact. How many of you have been to the sloughs? Okay, a lot of people. How many of you have heard of the sloughs? Know something about it? Okay, most of you. Great. So what a lot of people may not realize is this is actually the largest undeveloped wetland complex in the United States. So it's incredibly significant locally for the Bad River Band, regionally for the north, for the entire ecosystem of Lake Superior, but it's also really significant for the United States as a whole. It's also the largest natural wild rice bed in the world. So there are larger cultivated wild rice beds, but cultivated wild rice, that sounds a little bizarre. Anyway, the cultivated paddy rice, we call it, and the natural wild rice beds have some really key significant differences. And so the fact that this is the largest natural wild rice bed in the world is extraordinarily important. It also, this one wetland complex turns out to make up, according to the Environmental Protection Agency, 40% of the wetlands on Lake Superior. And I think all of you know how important wetlands are to the health of a lake. Lake Superior, because of its geological history and because Canada up there is kind of odd, it doesn't really have a lot of wetlands compared to a lot of more southerly lakes, especially, well, Canada's not odd. Their geology is such that there's steep drops to the lake and there's not a lot of room for nearshore estuary development, except on a couple watersheds. And so the south shore of Lake Superior is extraordinarily important to the health of the overall lake. The St. Louis River estuary, now a new near site, a new, in other words, national wetland of interest, nearshore estuary reserve site, is incredibly important. But the Bad River Kakagan sloughs are even more important because they are an enormous percentage. I mean, that is so significant. 40% is huge. The Bad River Kakagan sloughs are home to at least 72 rare species. A significant number of those are threatened and endangered species. So this is incredibly important for plant diversity, for fish communities. It's nursery for many of the fish that actually spend much of their life in Lake Superior.